So, imagine sharing a bucket of popcorn with a high school-aged Kobe Bryant, right? Like right before he has to literally flee the movie theater to escape this huge mob of
Oh,
fans.
man. I mean, just picture that level of chaos for a teenager.
Right. But now imagine taking the psychological lesson from that exact moment, like really internalizing it, and then using it decades later to manage the most catastrophic bridge collapse of the century.
Which is just, it's such a wild trajectory.
It really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into the leadership blueprint of a guy who started polling at exactly 1% and somehow wound up managing one of the most high-profile infrastructure disasters of our time.
Yeah, we're pulling apart this really extensive, just wide-ranging interview from the PBD podcast that features Patrick Bet-David and Maryland Governor Wes Moore. And the mission here today is to really analyze the mechanics of his decision-making.
Exactly. Like, how does someone bridge that massive gap between military doctrine, investment banking, and just bare-knuckle politics? And I want to be incredibly clear right up front for you listening. This deep dive is absolutely not a political endorsement.
Right, and no sides being taken here at all.
None. We are impartially reporting on the viewpoints discussed in the source material. You should think of this as like a master class in applied strategy. It's a shortcut to understanding how high-level leadership and crisis management actually function in the real world, regardless of whatever political letter happens to be next to someone's name.
Yeah, and his origin story alone just completely breaks the traditional political mold. I mean, when you look at his resume, it reads like four different people.
It really does.
He was a member of the College Republicans at Valley Forge Military Academy, right? Then he deploys to Afghanistan as an Army paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne.
Which is intense enough on its own.
Exactly. But then he pivots entirely. He goes to work as a White House fellow under Condoleezza Rice before, pivoting yet again to become an investment banker in New York.
Which basically makes him a complete outsider to the traditional political machine. So when he decided to run for governor as a Democrat, I mean, the establishment had already picked their favorites.
Oh, yeah, they always do.
Right. He was this massive underdog polling at literally 1% in the primary. So mathematically, how do you even overcome that kind of deficit when you don't have, like, the party machinery printing yard signs for you?
What, you find the leverage in the blind spots. I mean, he basically bypassed the crowded, highly contested blue districts and went straight to Western Maryland. And context is super vital here. Western Maryland is a deep-red conservative stronghold.
Right. Didn't like 77% of that area vote for Trump in 2024?
Yeah, roughly 77%. But in a fractured Democratic primary, if you find a pocket of voters that every other candidate is completely ignoring, it gives you a disproportionate advantage.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so he actually won their gubernatorial straw poll, completely doubling the votes of the runner-up. And that single unexpected victory generated all this media momentum that eventually earned him Barack Obama's endorsement.
Wow. So he effectively proved he could cross traditional political lines right out of the gate. And he credits that ability to operate outside ideological boundaries to this philosophy he learned on day 2 in the Army, which is leave no one behind.
Right, the classic military ethos.
Exactly. But he doesn't just use it as a bumper sticker. He uses it as a literal metric for policy success. Like, if you start with 10 people, mission accomplishment means all 10 cross the finish line. And we see this play out most aggressively in how he tackled Baltimore's crime crisis.
Yeah, because when he took office, Baltimore was hovering near like a homicide a day. It was grim.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the standard political playbook usually forces a binary choice, right? Either you adopt a super tough law and order stance, pouring money into police at the expense of social programs, or you lean toward abolishing the police and rely purely on social reform.
Right, but he basically threw out that binary. He made these historic investments in local law enforcement while simultaneously pushing to federalize gun crimes.
Wait, federalize them?
Yeah, federalizing those crimes is a really specific legal mechanism that bypasses local bottlenecks. It meant getting shooters off the street in 24 hours instead of waiting weeks.
I hear that, but, historically, when a politician tries to throw money at both the police and community programs to keep everyone happy, the bureaucracy just eats the funding.
Oh, for sure.
It's like a business aggressively expanding its sales team while trying to completely rebuild its HR department at the exact same time.
Yeah.
The money just vanishes into administrative overhead. Did he actually set up a mechanism to track if these community programs were working, or was it just a political compromise?
No, he applied a purely outcome-based metric to it. The state heavily funded these community violence interruption programs, and the mechanism there is hyperlocal intelligence.
What does that mean in practice?
It means you hire and train people who actually live in those specific neighborhoods to identify retaliatory conflicts before they even escalate into gunfire. It's essentially treating violent crime as a contagious disease, and interrupting the transmission.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and because he funded both the enforcement side and the prevention side without bowing to that ideological pressure you mentioned, the state saw a nearly 50% drop in violent crime. They hit a 50-year low.
That is massive.
It is. In the military, the ultimate metric is mission accomplishment. You don't arbitrarily ignore half your toolkit just because it belongs to the opposing political party.
Which brings us to what I think is the most fascinating contradiction in his entire playbook, and that's his relationship with Donald Trump. Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is a masterclass in compartmentalization.
Absolutely.
On one hand, Moore went to war with the Trump administration over proposed cuts to SNFP, the food stamp program. Moore actually pulled $63 million from a state capital gains fund to backfill those cuts.
Yeah, it's specifically so Maryland children wouldn't go hungry just because of a political fight happening in Washington. He literally called the policy abhorrent.
Right. But then, in the exact same interview, Moore actively praises Trump for getting baby bonds passed, which Trump called Trump accounts.
Yeah, the baby bonds. The mechanism there is straightforward but incredibly powerful. It's a government-funded trust account established at birth for children born into poverty.
And the engine behind it is compound interest.
Exactly. By the time that child turns 18, that initial seed money has grown into, like, a down payment for a house or tuition money. It attacks generational poverty at its mathematical root. Democrats had been trying to pass this for a decade and completely failed. Trump got it done, and Moore literally says, give credit where credit is due.
Wait, so he pulls $63 million to fight Trump's food policy, but then goes out of his way to praise him on a wealth-building policy? I have to ask you, and the listener too, is that genuine pragmatism, or is it actually a highly calculated political strategy to win over independent voters by showing he isn't blinded by party loyalty?
What's fascinating here is that in high-level leadership, those two things are virtually indistinguishable. Compartmentalization is a form of leverage. By praising a fierce rival on a specific policy, Moore completely disarms his critics. He proves to conservative and independent voters that he cares more about the math of closing the wealth gap than the politics of who actually signs the bill.
Yeah.
But the personal dynamic between them is still totally wild.
Oh, yeah, they met at that Army-Navy game, right?
Yeah, Trump actually complimented Moore, calling him a good-looking guy. But then, months later, Moore was mysteriously disinvited from a National Governors Association dinner hosted by Trump.
The reaction to that snub is what's really telling to me, because Republican Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, who Moore describes as a close friend, immediately jumped to his defense. Stitt publicly declared it wasn't a real NGA dinner if a fellow governor was excluded.
Right. Moore has clearly built this bipartisan coalition among his peers that acts as a shield against that national party friction.
Yeah, and that ability to compartmentalize and focus strictly on the outcome was put to the ultimate test when a physical crisis struck his state. I'm talking about the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse.
Yeah. A massive cargo ship destroyed a 1.6-mile bridge almost instantaneously. Normally, a disaster of that scale just paralyzes a local government with jurisdictional infighting and endless bureaucratic delays.
But Moore established 3 unshakable pillars for the recovery, which were speed, safety, and cost savings. The original projections estimated it would take 11 months just to clear the channel so the port could reopen.
11 months, yeah.
And they cleared it in 11 weeks. But it wasn't just, a matter of telling people to work harder. The hard decisions behind that speed are brutal. Mid-project, Moore actually fired the initial contractor because the costs were escalating.
He describes himself as a hawk on taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
He really leaned heavily on that investment banking background. And firing a lead contractor in the middle of a globally watched disaster.
It's like changing surgeons halfway through a heart operation.
Exactly. Or changing the engine of an airplane while it's in free fall. You are intentionally halting your only forward momentum because you realize the current engine is going to bankrupt you before you hit the ground.
It's just an insane amount of risk to take on. Think about it. If the new contractor misses the deadline, the blame falls entirely on the governor. How do you even balance the demand for unprecedented speed with the refusal to write a blank check?
Well, you build a financial bridge while you build the physical one. Moore managed to negotiate a 100% cost share from the federal government.
Okay, how does that work?
The mechanism here is using federal funds as immediate bridge financing. Instead of waiting years for maritime insurance claims and all that corporate litigation to settle, which would just keep the port closed and bleed the local economy dry, the federal government fronts the capital to get the channel open in those 11 weeks.
Oh, so they essentially get an advance.
Exactly. Then, once the litigation settles, the state pays the federal government back. It's just a massive logistical and financial orchestration.
It really is. But, it's one thing to demand outcomes when you're clearing a bridge. Like, math is math. You can measure the tonnage of steel removed from the water.
Right.
But how does an outcome-based leader tackle deeply personal, polarizing social issues where there are no easy engineering fixes? Again, just a reminder to you listening, we are neutrally reporting the contents of the source material regarding these politically charged topics.
Absolutely. So when dealing with the debate over transgender athletes in sports, Moore views the issue primarily through the lens of a parent. He explicitly states he wants all kids to experience the teamwork, the discipline, and the life lessons that sports provide. However, his hard line is drawn at fairness and safety. He states he does not believe biological males should compete in female sports if it creates an unfair or unsafe environment for girls.
Though he does note that these specific athletic decisions are currently made by local jurisdictions, like county school boards, which he respects. But he makes his personal standard very clear.
Yes, and he takes a similarly firm stance on the topic of transitioning and puberty blockers for minors. The mechanism of his argument here is parental rights. He's absolutely adamant that schools and teachers cannot keep secrets from parents regarding a child's transition.
Yeah, he argues that parental guidance isn't just preferred, it's essential for medical decisions that carry those life-altering implications. So how does a leader balance trusting local jurisdictions to make their own rules while simultaneously holding this firm personal standard on what is fair and safe?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are watching the real-time evolution of the independent voter. These highly specific social issues are becoming the ultimate wedge issues. Politicians can no longer just hide behind broad, vague party platforms, right?
Yeah, voters want specifics.
Exactly. Voters are forcing executives to articulate definitive boundaries. Moore is navigating this by decentralizing the actual policy, leaving it to local school boards while centralizing the moral stance. He's signaling to independent voters that he shares their baseline concerns, even if he isn't dictating the policy from the state capitol.
It's a real tightrope walk. But while social policies shape a state's culture, a state's ultimate survival relies on its economic competitiveness and, frankly, the integrity of its democratic systems. And the math in Maryland before Moore took office was kind of terrifying.
Oh, it was awful. The state was facing significant net migration losses, meaning way more people packing up and leaving than moving in. Plus, state spending had increased by 70% in the 7 years before he became governor.
70%, while GDP stayed relatively flat.
Yep. And you just cannot sustain a government when your expenditure is growing exponentially faster than your tax base.
So what does this all mean? I'm looking at his response to this, and there's this fascinating political irony. He's a blue state Democratic governor, but he's boasting about decreasing the state's general fund for 4 consecutive years.
Yeah, it was pretty unusual.
And he passes the Decade Act, providing $100 million in business tax cuts. So how does a blue state governor sell budget cuts and corporate tax breaks to his own base?
By framing it as a complete economic emergency, he recognized the profound vulnerability of Maryland, relying entirely on what is known locally as EDS, Feds, and Meds. The state economy was fundamentally anchored by a massive but highly volatile federal workforce.
Right, so when the federal government shuts down or cuts budgets, Maryland's economy instantly crashes.
Exactly. So he uses the Decade Act to mathematically lower the barrier of entry for entirely new industries. He intentionally diversified away from federal reliance, targeting life sciences, aerospace, and quantum computing.
And the incentives worked. They poached Samsung Biologics, AstraZeneca, and they even secured the Second Sphere entertainment venue, like that massive glowing dome they have in Las Vegas for Prince George's County.
Yeah, and this ruthless demand for economic competition also drives his views on the democratic framework itself. The interview discusses a tweet from President Obama regarding a Supreme Court decision on a Louisiana redistricting map, and Moore uses it to vehemently condemn gerrymandering on both sides of the aisle.
The statistic he cites is just staggering to me. 92% of the country lives in non-competitive districts. He calls it embarrassing that politicians are picking their voters rather than voters picking their politicians. He demands national redistricting reform.
Because gerrymandering kills economic pragmatism. If politicians are protected by artificially drawn, hyper-partisan districts, they don't have to be pragmatic.
You don't have to compromise.
Right. They don't have to compromise to attract a company like Samsung Biologics, and they don't have to make the hard choices to lower taxes. True competition forces leaders to deliver actual mathematical results rather than just catering to their extreme base to survive a primary.
So true. Finally, scaling these leadership frameworks from the state level to the international stage requires an intense, almost ruthless level of personal focus. He leans directly on his 82nd Airborne background to define his foreign policy, and he outlines 3 non-negotiable rules for the use of military force.
First, kinetic force must be the absolute last option. Second, there must be a clear end state or mission defined before any action is taken. And third, you must build an international coalition.
Because, as he says, one side can start a war, but you need a coalition to build the peace.
Exactly. He actually critiques current U.S. operations for mission creep, calling it his biggest fear.
Right.
But he specifically praises operations like Midnight Hammer, the strike aimed at eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Why that one specifically?
Because of the risk calculation mechanism. Midnight Hammer wasn't some open-ended promise of regime change. It had a hyper-specific, non-expanding objective. Eliminate the nuclear capability. It paired a kinetic strike with a predefined exit strategy.
Got it.
But to maintain that level of strategic clarity, a leader has to be completely immune to political noise and distraction.
Which brings us all the way back to 1996 and that bucket of popcorn. So high school-aged Wes Moore goes to the movies with high school-aged Kobe Bryant. Kobe is already a local celebrity in Pennsylvania. They sit down, but a crowd immediately forms around the 6'6" Kobe.
I mean, you can't exactly blend in at 6'6".
Exactly. The distraction becomes so overwhelming that Kobe realizes he can't even watch the movie. So he asks if they can just leave to avoid the distraction. His buddy promises to pay more back for the ticket, but Moore never got his $5 back.
Which is hilarious. Decades later, he is still using that $5 grudge to define what we now call the Mamba mentality.
Right. It's the absolute necessity of blocking out all noise, criticism, and distraction if you want to achieve greatness. Kobe physically left the theater because the noise was compromising his focus.
This raises an important question because when you connect the Mamba mentality directly back to Moore's leave no one behind philosophy, you realize they're the exact same mechanism.
Oh, how so?
You cannot safely extract all your people from a crisis, you cannot clear a collapsed bridge in 11 weeks, and you cannot build a functioning international coalition if you are constantly distracted by the extraneous noise of political theater. Both require absolute clarity of purpose and the discipline to ignore everything else.
That makes total sense. So, to recap the through line of this deep dive, we're looking at a framework built entirely on pragmatism, taking military principles, applying them to bipartisan governance and crisis management, maintaining economic discipline, and keeping a laser focus on the end goal.
That's the playbook.
So we want to connect this back to you, the listener. Think about your own life, your business, or your career. How do you build your own coalition to ensure peace during conflicts? And when you take action, do you actually have a clear end state defined first?
Yeah, and we want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. If the Mamba mentality requires blocking out all distractions and noise to achieve greatness, at what point does a leader risk becoming too insulated from the very people they are trying to lead?
That's a great question. Where exactly is the line between vital, necessary focus and dangerous isolation? Think about it.